Yeah. So did you press record on your
on my end, so I won't worry about that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can record on Zoom, but if it says you can, then maybe you can.
It doesn't really matter. It will just won't let me do it without permission. But if you're going to send me it anyway,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Oh gosh, sorry. Hang on. Okay, sorry, that's my recalcitrant
All right.
child. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
a pain in the neck. Better
Oh,
not say that in the podcast. She's a pain in the neck.
oh gosh. Yeah, you're in a
I'm
bit
in the trenches.
yeah. In the war zone going to battle.
Oh God, sure am. But anyway, that's all
Yeah.
right. They're alive and they're safe. That's
But
what matters.
it's such a emotional pull, isn't it? Like it's something
Mm,
that people can't see
mm,
from the outside, but it's such a
mm,
entrenched feeling on the inside. It's like
mm,
this uh, ache. It's such a
mm,
strong feeling, isn't it, when you have
mm.
people that you care about and you love and that
And they're so vulnerable. They're just kids, and you just want the right thing for them. But it was interesting because I was reflecting on the DDP side of things and your own attachment histories, and we'll talk about that. But your own triggers, what your own triggers are from your own attachment history, and how you triggered parenting your own children, and how you've got to be aware of that. Like, yeah, I do. I have to be aware of that. I have to put better boundaries in place with my kids because
yeah,
I'm not good at that.
yeah,
Kind of thing. It's hard.
yeah.
You're always a work in progress. Mm.
Yeah, that's yeah, I guess that was when I had my two kids. You're reading about you go through and read parenting books and you want to obviously better yourself and it is very
Mm.
much a trigger and a reflection of your own childhood that you have.
Mm.
Um
Yeah,
yeah, it's
definitely.
like a
Yeah.
reparenting type thing. It's like, oh well, I'll never do XYZ. I'm going to try and do something different, and you try and break the mold and
And then it comes up at different times. You think, oh, I sound just like my mother. Oh.
yeah. Sometimes I want to sound like her because it's like a endearing feeling. Like I kind of enjoy
Mm.
replicating bits and pieces because I
Yeah.
found it funny as a kid the way she spoke.
Mm.
It's very typical Aussie, mum style. And so I kind of try and do that. But even though it's like I know it's annoying, yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Fun and games, eh? Fun and
yeah.
games.
All right.
Okay.
So first of all, I just wanted to say hi, Liz, and welcome to the Australian Adoption Podcast. It's so good to have you speaking with us today. I just wanted to let the audience know just a little bit about your background. So on a personal level, you are a mother to children through both adoption and foster care. So you have that first experience parenting children from difficult beginnings. Is that one of the main reasons why you went into social work?
Yes, most definitely. I think at the time, my first daughter, so I have three children, a 13-year-old, 19-year-old boy, 19-year-old girl. And my 19-year-old girl was um, uh, probably 2 at the time, or quite young. And she'd been adopted as a 7-month-old. And my husband and I were really struggling with her behaviour. She had, as a 7-month-old baby, slept beautifully, ate beautifully. It was just such a joy after 7 years of wanting to be a parent. And we'd obviously fallen in love with this little child, and then these terrible tantrums just erupted from her that would go for hours and hours, and I was just struggling with how best to support this child. And I met a beautiful person in the adoption community at the time who started to teach me about trauma and attachment and the implicit memory imprint on children and how it affects them and how it's coming out in her behaviour. And from that, I started to, I was a researcher anyway. I always enjoyed that kind of academic side of things. And I really started to throw myself into it. And I thought, right, this is my passion. That I can say first comes pain, then comes passion, then comes purpose. And this was a really painful time in our lives because this little darling baby was just having such a hard time of things. And that continued on for several years. But I thought, I'm going to teach myself. I am going to throw myself into this, and do the absolute best that we can possibly do for this child. So then I started to think about what I wanted to do, and social work seemed quite organic to me. I really liked the idea of kind of studying external systems and factors that influence and impact on people's lives, versus, say, psychology. And I also hated statistics, so there's no way I was going back and doing an entire psychology degree because I hate statistics. So social work seemed quite natural for me to move into. And so I picked Monash University in Melbourne, and every assignment, every assessment, every piece of research that I did, I tried to choose adoption so that I could learn as much as I possibly could to help this little being. And then from there, I went on and received my honours degree, and now I'm a mental health social worker. So I've gone more from advocacy and working with homelessness and domestic violence, those kind of things early in my career, into the therapeutic space and working with, I work with adoptive families, I work with children in foster care, as well as, a broad spectrum of areas, I guess, but that's my passion, I guess.
Yeah.
So from that came that
Wow.
passion, and then my purpose from that.
That's so good. That's such a great explanation how you said pain, passion, and purpose. That really resonates with me as well. And but yeah, just going back with your 7-month perfect, textbook baby, and then that massive behavior change. So that's obviously common for adoptive children or foster care children to, I guess, exhibit those outward symptoms, and then they somehow flick a switch, and then they become, some of them become severely dysregulated. You said to me before, like, you wish that you had have understood how to address this child back then. And you said over the phone about the Hobart. Something happened in Hobart. Can you tell us about that?
In Hobart. So Hobart was where we moved to when our first daughter was about 1, and we lived there till she was about 4. And that's where I met the most amazing adoption community of families. And I think that's a really important message to get out to people, is that if you are bringing children into your family from these difficult backgrounds, to have that support network around you. So I was really lucky with that. But then I met this beautiful friend who actually had 2 children adopted from overseas, and one of them had reactive attachment disorder, which is quite a severe condition in terms of emotional dysregulation and violence, that kind of thing. And she was the one that taught me about cellular memory, that this little person of yours is struggling with these memories of what happened to her that she cannot recall. So it's difficult to process feeling. I know this now, I didn't know at the time. Difficult to process what's happened to you if you don't have a memory of it. And it's stored in your body. Okay, so that's what was happening with her, and she was completely dysregulated. And of course, then the attachment side came into it. Like, I could see that she wasn't attached, and this friend was explaining to me, when she runs away from you, you need to get her and bring her back, because she's not coming back to you. There's no circle of security. She's going out to explore the world, but she needs to come back to you for safety and security. So that's what she taught me, and I owe her so much for being able to sort of sow the seeds, I guess, for me to learn to understand. And when you become adoptive parent, sure, you go through a bit of training, through different departments. But how do you reconcile that when your lived experience is this child that is having emotional breakdowns that last for hours, and is throwing things at you and hitting you and biting you, and just so dysregulated, and then you're becoming dysregulated yourself? How do you manage that? Those were the tools that I needed at the time. And that little community that I was in really helped start to embed that and to understand that, and then to go on and study what I've studied. And then hopefully impart that to other families, because it's so difficult, so difficult. Yeah.
Those community groups, and just having like a close friend that you meet, I guess, within the same circles is really important to for that support as a new parent. So how important is it to be trauma informed when raising children from these difficult beginnings?
I think it is imperative. I really do. When you're thinking about attachment, an attachment between a caregiver or a parent and a child being the template for all other relationships throughout your life. Okay, very, very important. It's a dance of attachment. It's the attunement between the caregiver and the child. Now, trauma causes the numbing of emotions. Okay, it also causes disruption of emotions, which will affect your ability to attach. Okay, so it's understanding that, I often liken it to a house. When you're building a house, if the foundation's strong, then the structure will be strong. So with little people, and it doesn't matter if it's a child that, I have clients where the parents the adoptive parents have been in the room when the child was born and handed over at birth. Those children are still being impacted. They're still impacted by the trauma of that rupture. Okay, so it's and I would say it doesn't matter how much love that child receives, how much care. You really need to understand that attachment needs to develop, and it takes time.
Yeah.
Because that is what is going to imprint on that child's neurological systems is that innate sense of safety, because that rupture in attachment, it is imprinting fear. Okay, and I think that's what was happening with our daughter, was that her system was completely overwhelmed by this terrible sense of fear that she couldn't articulate.
So that was like a somatic response until she learned how to verbalize her emotions.
Yeah, definitely. And so what we did at the time was try to contain that. So there was a lot of holding. There was a lot of, I'm not leaving you. You're throwing things at me. I'm not leaving this room. I am not going anywhere. So it's a lot of that co-regulation that we had to learn. And that's really hard for parents. If you have a child, whether the child's 16 or 3, that upheaval and that dysregulation of emotion, you need to be able to co-regulate with that child and show them this is the way it's done. And I'm not leaving you. I am not going anywhere. I'm here. I'm going to protect myself from those shoes that you're throwing at me, but I am here in the room with you. Okay?
Yeah.
And I can hold your pain. That's kind of what it's about. I'm here for you, and I can hold your pain. I can hold your traumatic response because I'm not going anywhere. It's a tough gig. It's a tough gig.
Tough gig, but yeah, so you got solid roots, to know, it is good for the child to know that, even though they probably can't control what they're doing at the time.
So it's not really about, well, it is about the behaviour, but it's about asking, people say, well, what's wrong with that child? Why is that child behaving that way? I think a way to change that perspective is to say, well, it's actually not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you? What happened to you in those early days, and I don't know what happened in the prenatal period for my children. I roughly know what happened in that first 6 or 7 months, and they received very good care, but there was no attachment, which is what breeds that sense of safety and trust. And that's why so many adopted children and children in care struggle with trust. And of course, from that then comes this huge sense of, I need to control my environment. I need to control everything because that's what makes me feel safe. And these maladaptive behaviours form from that. But it's getting underneath that. I have to rebuild that structure. I have to relay cement over that rickety foundation. How am I going to do that? And that's what I was learning with my daughter as a baby.
So that would have been so helpful to learn that from a theoretical perspective, textbook, and then to try and integrate that into your personal family life. How did that, I can imagine that it would be super helpful to just know that there is a reason that this stuff is happening, and it's at that cellular memory level, and the importance, like you were saying over the phone, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you, and understanding the development of the brain as well.
That's right. So if a child's constantly being thrown back into that primitive part of their brain, that fight or flight response, and their amygdala is, that part of the brain's firing, how can we calm that down? How can we help a child learn to access that more cognitive part of our brain And often it's by calming the nervous system and calming the body, first and foremost. And I'll often see people with little 3 or 4-year-olds in the supermarket, for example, throwing massive tantrums, and it's hugely embarrassing, and the parents are trying to talk the child around. And I often think, the child can't access that cognitive part of their brain, because the brain, when it flips its lid, it can't access that higher level thinking when it's in that lower level thinking. So how can we do that? Well, we can hold the child, we can calm the child down, we can rub the child's back, we can sit with the child, because those words, they're gone. They're not. Then it's impossible to be in those two parts of the brain at the same time. Particularly difficult for a child that's experienced disruption and a traumatic beginning. And I firmly believe that any form of adoption is a traumatic experience for a child, no matter how loving the act and how beautiful that life that child may then go on to live. It's still a traumatic experience.
Yeah. And you said just before, sorry to interrupt. You said just before about, I guess, when people go through the process of fostering to adopt, and there is some avenues for them to access, help and training and that sort of thing. But why should parents who raise foster or adopted children seek professional support and ongoing professional support throughout that child's life, especially into the teen years too?
I think it's especially important for parents to really look after their self-care. Really, really important, because if you're not doing okay, if you're not putting your oxygen mask on first, how are you going to support that young person in your life? Okay, really, really important. And if that means, having someone to talk to, and I found that very, very helpful over the years, just having that weekly check-in. It's a hard week. This is what happened. What are some strategies you could have helped me with? I think that's very, very important. There are a number of different types of therapeutic approaches that help with children. Help regulate children, help with attachment. And I think for a lot of parents, it's not innate. Like that traditional style of parenting doesn't often work for our children. So learning different strategies, different coping mechanisms, different ways of raising these children can really, really help. So I think that's what's important. And I also find, because I work with several teenagers in the care system, for them, having someone other than their parents or their carers to talk things through with is really beneficial as well. It just gives them that added extra adult in their lives, and it really takes a village to raise a child. But for these children, gosh, that's definitely part. It has to be part of your plan. You cannot isolate yourself, and you need to know what those supports are and how to access them. And someone, it has to be a professional that either has an adoption background, which can be hard to find in Australia, or someone who with an experience of trauma, definitely. Sometimes it can take a while to find that person.
Yeah. So you're talking about like therapeutic parenting, this therapeutic parenting style, and most parents probably haven't heard of that before, or you were saying it's seen as weak. Why is it seen as weak? Because it really is tapping into their emotional space, and
I think, as I said, that traditional style of parenting, where we're reacting to a child's behaviour, and where people feel that the child needs to have discipline around that. It's a different idea, I guess. I mean, discipline really means a learning experience, doesn't it? And teaching. It doesn't mean punishment. And I certainly found that people couldn't quite understand why my children weren't, I guess, traditionally punished for their behaviours. But the most important part about therapy, or one of the most important parts about therapeutic parenting, is remembering that there needs to be connection before there's correction. Okay, so you're developing attachment with this child, you're co-regulating with that child, you're trying to show that child there's a different way of doing things. Because often these children have an internal model of working that's very negative, because there's a lot of pervasive shame. So it's not about I've done X and therefore I feel guilty, so my behaviour should be punished for that. Because often these children don't feel guilt, they feel shame, and there's a big difference there. Because I feel guilty because I stole that lolly from the shop, versus I'm ashamed of myself, I'm a bad person. You know, I'm not innately good. You know, and that can come from a number of ways of thinking. I wasn't a good child. Is that why I was removed from my family? I wasn't a good baby. I'm not lovable because my birth mother couldn't keep me. These kind, it's very, very, it's really stored in their bodies. So kind of avoiding that punitive approach, I guess, and focusing on that high structure, high nurture, which is what therapeutic parenting is all about. Lots and lots of nurture, lots of consistency, empathy, acceptance for where the child is sitting at that moment, because you're trying to help them develop their sense of security and trust in themselves and the trust in the world around them. I'm
And
just thinking,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Oh no, it's so good what you're saying. It's yeah, it just makes sense. Yeah, because I guess those those children, they can be so destructive when shame comes into it. And you mentioned some of the positive outcomes from this style of parenting. What has been some positive outcomes for you personally with your experience?
I guess I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was thinking, what's a good example? And I was thinking of my daughter, my oldest daughter, who, she slept with us or on the floor with us until she was probably 5 or 6, until her sister came along. That received a lot of negative thoughts from people. She's too old, she should be in her own room. But she was frightened of going to sleep. Okay, she had lots of terror around that. And she was very, very attached to me, and found it quite difficult to remove herself from me. So we did a lot of that kind of co-sleeping, and she was with us for a long time. But I really put in the hard yards when she was younger, because she was such a poor sleeper. Even when she went into her own room, I would sit with her, I'll lie with her, and I would sing with her and read books until she calmed down enough to sleep. And that could be a couple of hours a night. It was, really in the trenches. It was hard work. And a lot of, people would, they give you advice, and it's they're trying to help, but she just needs to learn to sleep on her own. She needs to go into her own room, and that's that kind of thing. But I just knew that this wasn't the right thing for this little girl, following the traumatic tantrums and outbursts and things that she'd had, that she really needed me to regulate with her. And so I'd sing this particular song with her. It'd go on for a long, long time, an hour, 2 hours, until finally, when she hit about 10, one day she said, "I'm going to sleep, Mum and Dad," and she went off on her own. Now, that took 10 years for that child to finally feel safe enough to go and sleep in her room. Okay, and I was like, my husband, "I cannot believe it, she's finally gone to bed on her own." But it wasn't until recently, and she's 19 now, so it's probably about 6 months ago, she said to me, "Mum, sometimes when I'm going to sleep, and if I'm worried about something or I can't sleep, I will sing that song to myself." And even thinking about that makes me get a bit teary. Because I think, wow, I did it.
Oh my gosh, my back, I've got goosebumps all over my body now. Oh, that's such a beautiful story.
Yeah, she still sings it to herself, and that's how she regulates herself now. So that's what I guess I was teaching her. Even though I'd fall asleep sometimes in the middle of the song, and she'd wake me up, and that's how long it took. It took a long, long time, and that was a baby adopted at 7 months. Very, very good care, very good care. But there was no, it was a regular team of nurses that were with her on shifts, kind of thing. So there was no attachment there. But I think that I just went, wow, I finally did it. That she can regulate herself, and this is one of the tools that she uses. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Very powerful.
Oh, it's super powerful. It's amazing, and just she's so lucky to have you. And
I always say to people, we're very lucky to have them.
And yeah, of course.
Yeah. One of the questions you get as an adoptive parent and a foster parent, especially of children that look differently to you, because the girls are adopted internationally and my boy is also from another country. They're so lucky. And I'd always turn around and say, no, we're the ones that are lucky. No child should have to feel lucky to be born into a or to be adopted into a family where the lucky ones.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because people used to say that to me.
Mm,
And I did feel very lucky. I felt very fortunate
mm,
to be in the position
yeah,
I was. And
yeah.
it sort of does have a bit of a sting to it.
Yeah, it does, I think. Yeah. And we want to take that sting away from these kids as much as we can.
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, it's amazing work that what you're doing. Um, I wanted to talk about, I guess, using, I guess, your daughter as the example, because we have been speaking about her today,
mm,
about the outbursts and about not being able to, verbalize how how she was thinking and feeling, especially in those early years.
mm,
So this is the first I've heard of pre-verbal grief. Can you
mm.
explain sort of the pre-verbal grief and maybe what that looks like?
Well, I guess that's talking about that memory, and we don't really develop memory as we think of it now, which is kind of in snapshots until we're about 2 or 3. Okay, so the memory that we have prior to that is in our body. Okay, it's in our it's a cellular memory, I guess. So it's for a child that is removed for whatever reason from the birth mother they're connected to, from the time of conception, whose heartbeat they've heard all through their lives, that are, born to that mother, held by that mother, and to be removed from that. How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that as a little person who's only feeling that, can't can't verbalize it, can't really think about it, but still has to somehow process those feelings and those emotions? Well, it comes out in their behavior. It comes out in their fight or flight response. It comes out in their in exactly that, the way that they're displaying their emotions. Okay, so for my little girl, it was those terrible tantrums and anger, and the only way we could, we had to try and contain her and be there with her. And it wasn't until she was about 4 that she broke down in the car one day and was crying, and I had to pull the car over, and I was talking to her, and she said, "I'm so sad. I'm so sad. I miss her so much. I miss my birth mother so much." And I thought, this is what has been happening. This is this terrible fear, that she's felt in her body for so long. And I made the mistake of saying to her, "I know you do, sweetheart. I know you miss her so much." And she said, "How would you know what it feels like to miss her so much at the age of 4?" And I thought, you're right. I'm not adopted. I didn't lose my birth mother at birth. You're exactly right. I don't know, but I do know now that was that grief that you were feeling, and the symptoms that were coming up was fear, and it was grief, and it couldn't be processed because you didn't know how. And so one of the techniques I used for her was teaching her about emotions. And we'd withdraw emotions and we'd throw them on the fridge, and she'd have to run to the fridge, and she'd have to smack on the fridge when she was feeling, what am I feeling? I'm feeling angry. This is when she was about 2. And I taught her to label her emotions and to be able to voice those emotions so that she could then start to talk about what she was feeling. But adoption really is I think at times, a very disenfranchised grief.
Mm,
Pre-verbal or not, it's, well, you're very lucky, you're going to a good family, you're loved, you're cared for, you have a good life. But what about the life you had before? And what about the fact that there was no choice for you in those decisions? So it's not like when someone dies or you lose an animal, there's an obvious grief there, or if you're in, bushfires, there's a communal reaction. Often these children don't have that, so they really need that supportive, therapeutic parenting to help them through that, and to recognise that it is grief. It really is grief, and it's grief from the time that they've lost that birth mother. Yeah.
yeah, that's really well said. Um, so we've talked about therapeutic parenting and how important it is, I guess, for parents to seek out that professional help throughout, ongoing support. What about the child, that knowing about the child's developmental milestones
Mhm.
in the brain? in the body so that they are more equipped to care for them?
Okay, so one of the things, and one of the things that I find, I guess, a little bit challenging when working with parents is that often they'll, and teachers, it'll often be, they'll often refer to chronological age. Well, the child's 12 now, they should be able to go on school camp. The child's 15 now, they should be looking for a job. The child's 5 now, they should be able to play with other children and not snatch toys. Okay. And I often say, well, the issue there is that they may be at 12, but what is their emotional age? Are they more like a 6-year-old? And children that have had disrupted attachment and had traumatic experience in their lives will often operate at a much younger age. Okay, so I think that's part of what parents need to kind of be aware of, that, if you have to keep your, excuse me, kindergarten child home from school another year because at 4.5, 5, they're not ready to go, then that's okay. Because maybe they're not ready to go to school because they came into your care at the age of 2. That's okay. Societal norms, maybe the children go to school at 5, or maybe that's not the right thing for your child. Your child at 15, 16, they should be able, starting to think about university or a trade or finding a part-time job. Maybe your 15, 16-year-old is still trying to regulate themselves and still trying to work out who they are, because their identity has been swamped by this trauma and these changes in their lives. Maybe they won't get a job until they're 18. Maybe they'll need to float along for a couple of years and then they'll choose to go somewhere else in life and take different paths. So I think that's an important part. Just remember, is your child maybe chronologically at this age, but where are they emotionally? Where are they sitting? And do we have to go back? Do we have to go back and treat that child as that young person, which is a big factor in adoption? Children will come home and one of the things that you can do to nurture attachment is to treat them like young babies. My children were carried for a lot longer than what you would be carrying a child because they hadn't been carried when they were babies. They had bottles for longer because that's a nurturing thing to do with the child. They had bottles longer and dummies and things like that longer than what society would probably consider okay. Because I was taking them back, we were taking them back to build that attachment from the beginning onwards. And the same with our son who came to us at 13. He would be very, very unhappy at 14 if it wasn't me who picked him up from soccer training, for example. And parents will go, well, that's crazy. He could walk home or he could get a lift with a friend. No, because we're building attachment. Just like a 5-year-old wants their mum or dad to pick them up from the school playground, I had to be there on time or we would be in trouble because he was going back. He was going back and we were trying to meet him at that age that he needed to be met at.
So it's looking after their social, emotional well-being and creating that emotional safety and knowing what the age of the child is emotionally and not so much developmentally is key with foster kids and adoptive kids. Yeah, that's really important.
Definitely.
I wanted to talk about, we'd probably have a chapter break here.
Okay.
Because this is a new new topic. Can you tell everyone about the annual camp that you established for young adoptive teens? This sounds really exciting.
Okay, so it was a joint effort, so I certainly didn't establish it on my own. It was I was part of an adoption group in Canberra that has been going for many, many years. And the president at the time was really clued into the fact that we had a lot of international adoptees because they tended to come in waves. Okay? And we had a lot of children at the time that were about 12, 13, 14. And they were starting to drift away from their adoptive peer groups. They didn't want to go along to Christmas get-togethers anymore. They wanted to be off with their own peers, doing their own things, but they were disengaging from kids, from their friends within those networks, I guess. At a time when, teenage years are identity-seeking years, they're pushing boundary years, and we noticed that, this was an area that maybe we needed to kind of focus on to even if it was an annual event where they could get together and just be kids, internationally adopted kids with parents that look different to them, but that was the norm for the weekend. Okay, so try and re-engage these kids. So our president at the time did a fantastic job in kind of gathering the troops. And so we set up what was called Camp Chaos at the time and invited parents from the area and from the region. We had families coming from New South Wales as well into Canberra, and we held a camp for children, all internationally adopted, from probably the ages of about 11, 12 up until about 16, 15, something like that. And it was just a community building event, really, where the kids could get together, they could bunk down together. The parents came along as well, so the parents could get together and talk about what was going on for them with their teens and all their complex issues. We'd often have a guest speaker come in, and I remember one year we had an ex-SAS soldier came in and talked to the kids about how tough the training was, which was an eye-opener for them all. But that was kind of about, getting through the tough times, and created lots of conversation amongst the kids, and he was a bit of a mentor for them, I guess, for the day. They did lots and lots of activities together, lots of group work, team building exercises, ate together, slept together, and left the camp feeling pretty good about themselves, because some of these kids really had become disconnected at a time when, as Gabor Mate puts it, where parents and family need to matter more than peers. But in our society, the peers take over at a very developmentally crucial time for these kids.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that leads to my next question about the importance of parents being around, especially through their teenage years, even though the teenager may not show signs that they want their parents. It's just being available and being there, being present. What sort of resources can you recommend for anyone listening that wants to know and read more about these topics today, or to read more about teenage the teenage time? Because I know you mentioned how important it is, especially with boys in their teenage years. Do you want to talk about
there's some
what happens
interesting research around boys, where often parents, I think, when their children are little, they need to be there for them. Of course they do. Those children are very physically demanding. They're young. They need protection. But sometimes and it's really hard for parents because they have to work, but they'll often leave their children, the children will let themselves into the house, at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and will be home on their own until 6 o'clock when mum and dad come home. And coincidentally, that is often the time when children get into trouble, in that time when there's no parental supervision around. And this relates to teens, not just really young teens, but children in their mid-teens. Excuse me. So they did some research on boys, and they found that boys that were letting themselves into the house and parents weren't home until later in the evening were struggling with loneliness levels that equated to elderly men living in nursing homes, or who had lost their wives, their partners. So quite acute loneliness levels. And why is that? When, but my teen just goes into their bedroom and they don't want to come out, they just want to be with their friends. But what we need to realize is the teenagers still need those adults around to guide them and to help them, okay, and to be there for them. Even if you're just cooking in the kitchen, even if you're doing a Zoom call at work on the dining room table, there's still someone around. You still check, and if you can't do that, then checking in on them, meeting them when they get home, making them, cook dinner. I'll be home at 6, and we're going to do this together. That constant check-in. Even though they may rebuff that, it's really, really necessary, because otherwise, and there's a really good book that I'd recommend called "Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers" by Gabor Mate and Gordon Neufeld. And that's when he talks about how we need to reclaim our children from peers, because the peers don't have the answers. they're not the ones with the adult maturity to be able to handle crises and situations that teenagers are facing. They're important, of course they're important, but the parents need to be the ones that are there for them. And pushing teenagers into independence too soon can create feelings of panic, can create, and can set children off. So just really being mindful of those teenage years and being around, still going to their soccer games, still going to their netball games, knowing who their friends are, having parents, numbers in their phones, even though they will fight that, they will rebuff that, it's still setting up a boundary and an expectation. I've got you. I'm still here whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I have in my mind, it's like a safety net. It's like a net just being sort of cast out, just sort of let that child know, yeah, like you said, boundaries, safety, and yeah, and just because I think children need boundaries. They need like a limit of what they can
Well, it's what makes them feel safe. They mightn't like it, but it's what makes them feel safe, because especially for our children, earlier in their life, they've experienced ruptures in that, and they've experienced times when they probably didn't feel it in control. Okay. And that influences their capacity to trust others. So that's important to remember. So you're creating that environment. Okay. Yes, I'm giving you some leeway. You can go out and do this, but I expect you home at this time. I'm going to be home on this day and this day and this day at this time. Sure, you can listen to music in your room, or you can play your PlayStation, or whatever you're going to do, but I'm still going to be here to take you to footy.
Yeah, and that's good because there's an element of predictability and sort of.
And that's very, very important for children that haven't had that predictability and that consistency, is for you to implement that for them. That's what they need. That is what will make them feel safe. And once they feel safe, they'll be able to disengage from that more primitive part of their brain and then link into the cognitive part of their brain and start developing reasoning and ability to interact with others and that kind of thing, because you can't do that when you're sitting in that fight or flight response.
So you were talking just a little bit before about rupture, and there is that rupture and repair approach, and also the pace parenting model, because you're trained in dyadic development psychotherapy, and that's about the pace parenting model, and that includes the rupture and repair approach. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the psychologist behind that?
So Dr. Dan Hughes is an American psychologist who early in his career was working with children from hard beginnings, and he just felt that there was something missing in the treatment, that it wasn't working particularly well, whatever his methods were that he was using at the time. So he developed dyadic developmental psychotherapy. Now I'm struggling to say it. That is the PACE model. And the approach is really based on a child's need for psychological safety. They are not going to develop, they are not going to attach if they don't feel safe. Okay, so this has got kind of a model of intervention that he came up with. Underpinning that is, just because you take a child out of an environment that may be abusive or neglectful, doesn't mean the behaviours are going to go away, because they're still stored in their body. Okay, so he developed DDP, and it really is a style or a practice where the therapist works with the parents. Okay, because that's the first step. And in an attachment model, you'll always work with the parents and the child. Okay, not just with the child alone. And then send 1 hour of therapy a fortnight and then sending them home isn't going to really do a great deal of good if the child's attachment and dysregulation and those sorts of things are bubbling. Okay, so working with the parents, encouraging motivation for the parents to work with work with their child. You know, are they comfortable relating to that child on that in an attachment secure way? So not using those kind of traditional punitive approaches when children's behaviour is out of control. Looking at the behaviour underneath that, co-regulating with the child. These are kind of things that you talk with the parents through. What are their own attachment styles? Are there triggers in their own attachment histories when the child's acting in a certain way? So being able to reflect on that and go, yeah, that's why I react so badly when this child swears at me and is really rude to me, because that wasn't something that was allowed in my house, and I was very firmly embedded in me that I did not do that. That's very triggering for me. So just, you know, reflecting on your own upbringing and style of attachment. You know, teaching the parents how to co-regulate with the child. Really, really important. Can that child turn to you for comfort and safety no matter what they have done? You know, do they know that it's going to be a safe environment for them to talk things through, for them to come and say, I stole a car, Dad, and I ran into a tree?
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one, because a lot of kids, you know, when they make a mistake, they tend to not want to say anything to their parents, because they will get, you know, those feelings of I'm a bad person, shame.
Definitely. So I'll give you an example, was one young person that I was working with had been suspended from school once again for punching a child, and, you know, quite violent behaviour. Okay, now when I saw this child, was quite dysregulated, quite upset. You know, you could see it in his body. He was fired up, he was puffing himself up. Now this is a child that had, you know, considerable neglect and trauma, had been abused by big men. And that was his reaction, was to fight his way out of situations. Okay, he's a young teenager. Now, I could have said in my brain, I'm thinking, oh, not again, that poor other student. Oh, this child is, you know, is he improving? He's so angry, you know, all this is going through my mind. But I had to calm myself down and say, well, not why did you do that? That's not okay behaviour. You know, you're going to get grounded when you go home, or whatever the kind of typical responses may be. My response was to calm him down, get him a drink of water, and then say, oh, she must have had a really, really hard day today. It must have been really, really hard for you to feel that angry. So validation and acknowledgement that he was out of control. And he was out of control because of what had happened to him in the past. And that was his go-to. You know, and that calmed the situation down. So that's that, you know, you have a rupture in your relationship, but you've got to repair it. But flip that around which is what you do with little children. You know, there's a rupture in someone throw something all over the floor, the child will get into trouble, then you pick the child up and you comfort the child. This approach is make a connection before you correct the behaviour. Okay, so the connection was, I'm validating how you're feeling. That must have been so awful for you to feel that bad, that you felt that you had to hit someone. Okay, and then worry about the correction afterwards. And the correction may take a couple of days if it takes a long time for a child to calm down. And so, for example, with my son, who's, you know, experienced a very traumatic upbringing, I've noticed at 13, 14, whoa, you take days to calm down, days for that cortisol in his system to calm down. But now we'll have a rupture. You know, even though I may try to connect, but it may not work. He may hang up on me or yell at me or whatever it may be. But he is so much quicker to come back around now, because I've learned that we have a connection first and then we look at the correction afterwards. So it's that safe, warm environment. And that's what, you know, the PACE model looks at, and that's what Dan Hughes kind of developed, okay? This system to comfort children and to validate the way they're feeling, okay? And you're improving their psychological safety so that they can then go on to learn to modify their behaviour.
That's so important. Gosh, I wish all parents had this knowledge before they, you know.
And it can apply to all parents. It's not just kids from hard places.
You know? Absolutely. I think it's the way to go for sure with any child, any parent needs to know about it. It's so important because a lot of parents do lose connection with their children quite early on, just simply based on poor communication. and disciplinarian styles are not, it may be what they had as a child, but they have corrected it themselves to think, no, well, that's not the right way forward. It's not a positive parenting solution. It's more, like you said, that old traditional sort of way. Discipline is not a avenue for learning. Discipline is about consequence and punishment. Which is terrible. Like, it's terrible for both parents and the child, because then they don't establish what they could have, which is an amazing relationship, which extends into teen years and adult life.
And I think that's the problem when we talk about therapeutic parenting, referred to some people as seeing it as being weak, because that they say with the children there needs to be consequences for their behaviour. Well, there are consequences, because what you're doing is you're trying to give them a calmer way to regulate, and therefore their self-esteem goes up and that punitive shame goes down, and then they will understand consequences as they get older. But they're not going to understand it while they're so dysregulated. And that's why Dan Hughes talks about the PACE model, which stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So play for these kids is so important, and making a joke about things, and even 15-year-olds mucking around and playing with them. That's a beautiful way to form a connection. Acceptance of where they're at. Where are we at right now? And curiosity. Gosh, you're really, really angry. What was that about? Why were you feeling that way? What was going on? And it's almost, this type of therapeutic approach is almost storytelling with the children. It's not about lecturing them. It's not about telling them, giving them homework, and this is what you have to do, and this is what you have to work on. It's talking with the child in a story-like way. So this is what happened to you. Gosh, what were the feelings that were coming out then? How did that make you feel? And lots of empathy. To the point that it sounds over the top. The empathy almost seems over the top, but that's how you tune in with children.
Yeah, and that's how they connect in with you, and that's all you really want, because I think if you're not connecting in, they're not going to listen to what you have to say. If you're not connected in, it's just going to be arms folded and trying to be combative. Because how you're reacting to them isn't sort of a response that's warm and friendly, even though they have maybe done something that's unsavory. But I think that's such a good way of putting it. Connect and correct. There's lots of acronyms today. Connect and repair. Connect and correct. And repair. PACE. I hope everybody's listening. They can obviously, pause it and rewind and write some notes down. But yeah, there's lots.
There is.
It's so good. So it will help people probably remember when they are with their children. And you do have a private practice. You speak with mainly adoptive and foster care families.
Mainly. Mainly. Yeah. It's a part-time practice, but that's kind of where my passion and my drive is. And so I work with families. So I will see children on their own, but then I'll always reconnect with parents. As the parents, it depends. It depends on the family dynamic. But it's the same issues that come up over and over again. Is that attachment disruption, identity seeking as the children get older? Who am I? Where did I come from? That feeling poorly about themselves, that pervasive shame, building up their self-esteem so that shame will reduce a little bit. Working on their attachment. It's a really, really interesting and very, very important part of work, and it takes time. And with children in particular, no child is going to trust someone as soon as they walk in the door. So it's all that relationship building all the time, and it can be very slow progress. But I can say from looking at my own children that it does work. It does work. It takes time, and you'll see they're only children for a short period of their lives. You know, they're adults for a lot longer. But if you can embed this high nurture, high structure regime in your home, learn to co-regulate with them, show them what relationships can be, not what they were, then it will work. It will work. It may not be perfect. You know, the child may go down different paths that parents are mortified by, and that certainly happened to me at times. But, you know, it's the small wins, you know, celebrating those small wins. Oh, wow, he didn't run away overnight. He only ran away for a couple of hours. Yay.
Yeah.
You know, that's important to celebrate.
Flipping the that mindset mentality about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess lastly, this has been such an amazing discussion, and I've got so much out of it, and I hope, you know, the listeners have will, you know, I'm sure that they will as well. Do you have any recommended resources? Basically, I know you mentioned Gabor Mate, with the Hold On to Your Kids. We've got you know, anyone can look up the Dan Hughes PACE parenting model.
There's also TBRI, which came out of the States, which is trust-based relational interventions, which is another, they're all attachment-based, but that's another way of creating opportunities to engage with your children and manage those difficult behaviours. Deborah Gray is another interesting resource. Attaching in Adoption was one that I read earlier on in my career. And I think she's a social worker as well. And she is very practical. The tools that she implements and advises you on are really nice, practical, because often you can read and do all this research, but then how do you take that and implement it in your family when, you know, your children are having meltdowns, or they're, you know, you're getting phone calls from school all the time and nothing seems to be working? You need practical tools as well. There was also quite an interesting book from CASE, the Centre for Adoption Support and Education in the States, called Beneath the Mask, which was understanding adopted teens. And I've done some work with them. So Deb Riley wrote that one. And that talked, you know, there's case studies in there as well, and treatment considerations for therapists and parents as well, because it does get tricky when they become teens. So they're just some of the ones, I guess, that I rely on, I guess.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really good. Lots for people to look up and research and read and see what works for them, and, you know, trial and error, basically.
And staying and finding your community, I think, is really, really important. Finding those other families that are like-minded and that have a similar approach to you, because you can always teach each other things. And recognizing that sometimes our children are different and they do need a particular approach, just to help them along their way. And support for parents, very, very important, because it can be very isolating to have children that others view as out of control and aren't being invited to play groups or sleepovers, can't go on school camp because their behaviour is so disruptive. Very isolating for parents, and parents need all the support that they can get.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on this afternoon, and it's been amazing just chatting with you and getting to know you over the last, you know, however long, what is it? Has it been about 6 months we've been communicating?
I think so.
Yeah. But it's been, a long time coming, and it's been great to speak about this topic, and I think it's important, and I think the more stories and experience, that knowledge that people have, I think the more that we can kind of create that community, more of like an online community presence, as well as
definitely. Very important to stay connected and to not give up hope. You know, there's learned hopefulness, I guess, and you can, you know, really turn the tables on things and think, wow, okay, light bulb moment. He may not have gone to school very much this week, but he made it for one morning. That's okay. That's okay for this week. That's a little bit of a shift. That's a little bit of a win.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's probably so good to have someone that does have that positive mindset when there's always going to be a negative mindset. Like there's a positive and a negative. So if you always go with the positive, I mean, it is showing them that role modeling example, and it's going to make them feel better.
And that's what we want. We want our kids to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly what we want.
Yeah.
No matter what they do, no matter what they do, that you're there for them, that you are their safe space, because that's what they need.
Mm, excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadia. It was a pleasure.
Great. Well, I'll, I'll, once I send this off to the editor and she comes back, I'd say, like I was saying on the text, this is like the fourth episode, and
Okay.
I'm going to be releasing the season 2 first episode by the end. That's my goal, is to have it done by the end of the month. So then it's
All right.
monthly at the moment because, I'm traveling on the road and like
Yeah.
doing other
I'm,
things.
I'm amazed you can do it. I really am. You're
I
pretty
didn't
amazing.
I didn't think that I didn't think that I could. I don't know. I think I was just, yeah, I just thought, oh yeah, it'll be fine. But it has been a little bit harder than what I thought. I mean, I am sticking to the goal of like once a month, but I think
Mm,
next year when I'm back in Sydney, I will definitely, I'll be dedicating like a set day every week for it. So, if
wow.
I've got
Okay.
people lined up, then I can basically be like, one a week. Um, but
And do you have enough people to keep going? Or do
yeah,
you have people
so
coming forward?
yeah,
Mm.
there's so it's a bit of a mixed approach. So some people like yourself, it's like a through a mutual friend has
Mm.
and that's how we got in contact. But then there's been some that have contacted through Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, good.
But then I've also approached them. So I've gone on Instagram and followed people and, obviously looked at
Mm.
content, and then sort of private messaged them or whatever and just said,
Mm.
I hope you find the podcast useful if you ever want to, if you ever want to share your story, because people are at different
Mm.
levels on their journey with it, and not everyone
Yeah.
is ready to to share and have the words to express what's
Mm.
been happening on the inside.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
so hopefully I'm
Yeah.
able to create that space for people either to listen, or if not, it will encourage them to maybe start journaling and write stuff down and
Mm.
get everything out on paper, and then as part of their journey, they can then share and own that part of themselves and their truth and it's
Mm.
part of their identity and healing, I believe, because it happened to me. That's why I'm doing
Mm.
it, because it's been
Mm.
it's been such a process for me to get to this point,
Mm.
that I know that it would definitely be happening to other people
Oh,
at different moments
definitely.
of their
Definitely.
lives. Yeah.
Mm.
So it just depends
Mm.
on what, like for me, it happened at 35 because a traumatic event
Mm.
happened. But for other people,
Mm.
it could happen younger, or it could happen, yeah, it just
Mm.
depends. With
Yeah, I have a close friend who was adopted probably at 18 months, something like that. She's my age. And for her, she said it was when she had her first child,
yeah,
at 30 or something. That's when it really hit her hard. And how could someone give up their child? She was quite angry, but has since gone on and reconciled that, and has a really good relationship with her birth mother and her partner. And really interesting, really interesting.
yeah. I think it does take a life event or a trigger or something that kind of
Mm,
catapults you out of
mm,
what your normal conditioning, when you're kind of, I guess, maybe reinventing yourself or trying to, yeah,
mm,
it's your body talking basically when it's under
yeah,
stress or
yeah, definitely.
pressure or something, where like the soul is kind of trying to speak to you, and you
Mm,
can't really form words about the feeling. You just,
mm,
an unsettling feeling,
mm,
and you have to kind of do something about it. um
mm. Yeah, definitely. Our
yeah,
bodies are amazing, aren't they?
yeah,
And they try to
yeah.
tell us things, doesn't it? I often say that to kids. I say, well, where do you feel it? Do you feel butterflies in your stomach? or does your breathing get hard, you know? And then I explained to them about the nervous system and this big nerve that runs down their backs and hits all these important organs, and you know, this is what we need to do to settle. And kids are great, little kids, because I'm like, yeah, I'll do, you know, wall push-ups, and I'll jump up and down and regulate. You know, I can say, get your kids on the trampoline because it treats the limbic part of the brain, and it's really good for them. And, you know, work with your bodies. It's not just all up here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, you can have a bit of a monkey mind, and it can be
Mm.
a good distraction having that monkey mind. But you know, the true essence of who you are needs to be revealed, I think, in your lifespan. I think.
In your own time, and often in for younger kids and teens, it's about getting them through until they're ready for that. It's really the cold face stuff, sitting with them, holding them until they're mature enough to sort of start to work it all out. It's very, very hard at
Mm,
times, but
mm.
very rewarding. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, good luck with all of your children,
My nightmares.
beautiful children, your amazing, creative, beautiful, fun-loving children that
Well,
you
it was interesting about you talking about boundaries, because I put boundaries in place yesterday for the 13-year-old, and wow, did she fight back against those boundaries all day. She gave me hell. But she came out of it last night and she was pretty good. And today she's been a bit more accepting of the boundaries. And I think we've moved forward a bit, but you've got to sit in it, and it's awful.
Yeah, yeah. That initial resistance from their side, and then they kind of,
So
yeah, come on.
strong.
Yeah.
So strong.
It definitely
Anyway.
tests, definitely tests the testing the waters, and um yeah, I think it sort of, it challenges you as a parent, you know, how do I approach this? What do I say? And um sticking to your guns, and
Yeah, it's hard.
yeah.
It's hard. Some people find it. I don't find it easy. But some people are much. But my husband's much better at it. Nope, nope. That's it. Nope. I go, all right, well, you go and take the phone then, because I just can't do it.
Yeah. I'm a bit grey. I'm never black and white. I'm always hearing it from their side, and then I come back
Mm,
with my side, and
mm, mm.
yeah, it's so grey because I get it. You can kind of
Yeah,
you kind of get it.
yeah.
But you're just trying to like allow them to kind of understand just a little bit of how you're feeling, just a tiny bit.
Mm,
Once they've got that
yeah.
understanding, then they're
Mm,
like, okay, I can see where you're coming from.
mm,
Yeah.
mm.
But
And that's particularly hard for kids with trauma, because they don't get that. They don't get that. It's all about control, and I'm in control, and that's what's going to keep me safe. And I don't want to hear your side of the story.
yeah.
Okay then.
So they shut off much quicker then.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why they have so much trouble with relationships, because they can't take, you know, the little 5-year-old in the playground that pushes his friend over because he's talking to another kid. He can't stand the idea of his friend having another friend, so he reacts in violence, or you know, that kind of thing. That, you know, it's really, really difficult. So that's why all that co-regulation and that strong nurture, strong structure takes so long, though. It takes so long for them to get it, but
Yeah.
it's really, really important.
Yeah.
Really important. You can understand why they react the way they do. Poor
Yeah.
little bunnies. Mm.
Oh. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll let you
I'll
go.
let you go, and it's been lovely chatting with you, and
Yeah, lovely chatting with you too.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
been
so
great.
I'll just wait to hear from you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, sorry, yeah, back to the thing. So, it will probably come out in January if I can. January would be kind of like where we would be looking,
Mm.
unless I kind of try and like rush, like unless I try and get it
Yeah.
done sooner. But I do like to spend quite a bit of time on it
Yeah.
as well, and make sure that you're happy and all of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. No rush.
Excellent.
All
All
right.
right. Well,
All right.
I'll talk to you soon, and yeah,
Okay. Enjoy the rest of your day.
yeah, thank you. Enjoy.
All right. Bye, Nadia.
Bye.